Shalom, my friends. This is Steve Wiseman, the rabbi at Temple Solel here in Bowie, Maryland. And this video in the Judaism Unplugged series is called Let's Talk About Religion. In this video, we're going to look at some tools that we use in talking about religion in more general terms, so that we have those tools in our toolbox as we start our discussions of Judaism. We're going to look at some comparative tools, some evaluative tools. We're going to ask some questions that may sound easy, but may be difficult for us to answer because we're not used to asking them of ourselves. As a reminder, this Judaism Unplugged series that we at Temple Solel are proud to sponsor with the Interfaith Coalition of Bowie is designed hopefully to achieve a number of valuable and positive goals. To increase the understanding of Jews and Judaism in the larger community, to overcome stereotypes and misconceptions and misinformation, whether based upon false assumptions or lack of experience or lack of awareness or knowledge. To better recognize our similarities and our differences as people of different faiths. To learn to appreciate both the differences and the similarities, and to learn to balance between them better. To get to know ourselves better, particularly for those Jews who are participating, by seeing ourselves through the eyes of how others see us. To lay groundwork for more and better partnerships now and in the future. So I want to start today by asking you a question for your own benefit. And that question is, what do you think you know about Jews and Judaism already? And then when you're finished answering that question for yourself, I'd like you to think about and answer for yourself the same question about your own religious faith and identity. What do you know about that? I'm not doing this to make anyone feel good or bad about their level of knowledge of either Judaism or their own faith. It's one of the many comparative exercises that I think are valuable for us in this undertaking of better understanding. I would hope you know your own religious faith better than you know Judaism if you're not Jewish. It's the one you're living. If you have difficulty answering that question, that may raise some issues that you want to take up in another place. Hopefully in a positive way, hopefully in a way that doesn't preclude you from continuing to participate with us here. But if our goal is to increase an understanding of Jews and Judaism, we should probably have a baseline understanding of our own faith to know when we're getting close to a similar understanding, or level of understanding at least. Now, what do you do with that information once you answer the question about what you know about Jews and Judaism? The first thing I would ask you to do is to fact check it. In this day and age, that's a pretty good way to start any learning exercise, any discussion. To make sure that your facts are in fact based in accurate information. They're not the product of hearsay or stereotype or based upon the punchlines of a joke you heard, but that they're solid facts that Jews recognize and accept to be true about ourselves. Fact check it with reputable research guides. Fact check it with your Jewish friends. And if you don't have Jewish friends, find some, make some. Because there is no better way to gain knowledge and experience of Jews and Judaism than by knowing people who are living it every day and willing to talk about it with you and answer your questions. Share it in question and answer form if you're participating in an organized discussion, whether it's with us, or at some other point, maybe in your own house of worship, maybe amongst your own friends. Hey, I've been watching this series that Rabbi Wiseman is putting out on Judaism. I learned something. Did you know that? Discussion questions for your own life and your own circle. And then for yourself, use this new information or this information that you already have as a guide, as a foundation, as a measuring stick to allow you to add new learning through it and on top of it, to assimilate this learning into your thoughts and your actions, not just when you're interacting with Jews or looking at the world, but to be able to see the world through eyes other than your own when you're troubled by any issue, to be able to evaluate whether your response is a response that's good just for you, or whether it truly is good for more than just you. If we're going to grow closer to each other and work together to improve the human condition in America, that's going to be a critical tool to have. And we'll talk even more about that in a moment. I want to share a definition with you. A definition that I think is critically important, and like the question we started with, one that we don't often stop and think about or wonder about enough. How would you define religion? There's probably multiple answers to this, I'm sure there are. When I started to teach Introduction to Judaism years ago, it was suggested to me that it would be helpful to provide such a definition for my class. I panicked at the suggestion because it was a question I had never thought to try and answer consciously, even though I was already ordained as a rabbi. It was just sort of assumed we understood it. And I think on a holistic level, I did. But intellectually, I'd never been forced to confront the exercise of trying to put it into words. And I struggled to find a definition that I was comfortable with and that I was comfortable teaching to others. But I was fortunate to be working that first time around with one of my senior colleagues in the region at the time, Rabbi Bruce Kahn. And he provided for me the anthropologist's definition for religion. He actually provided it for the class, and I learned it right along with them. I want to share it with you now, and forgive me if I read it to make sure I get it exactly right. I'm also going to put it up so you can read it. Religion, according to the anthropologists, is the collection of beliefs, words, and behaviors of an individual or a group whose primary purpose is to bridge the gap between the world as it is and the world as we would like it to be. It was like a light bulb went off when I heard Rabbi Kahn say these words. I asked him to repeat it so I could write it down, and then a third time to make sure I got it right, because I knew I'd be sharing this definition for the rest of my career as a rabbi. It's a powerful definition. It's an all-inclusive definition. And again, I'll ask you now, based upon this definition, to apply it to your understanding of your own religious identity and practice. See where it obviously applies. See where you're having trouble making connections so that you can strengthen yourself, even as we begin to study Judaism. I also want to share 3 classical frameworks for talking about religion in general, for learning about a specific religion, for comparing religions to each other. 3 ways of evaluating a religious system, if you will. Each of these has value in its own way, in different situations, in different circumstances. Each of them is an excellent tool to have in your toolbox as you begin your inquiries into Judaism, or any religion, or any group for that matter. The first of these models, the first of these frameworks, is the narrative model. In this framework, we look at a religious ideology on the basis of its core story or stories. Most intriguingly, when we look at what are considered to be the great Western religions, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, there is a commonality of the role of the core narrative in the development of the religions. As an outsider, I have learned, and I hope I do not offend anybody when I say that one of the ways of understanding Christianity is by understanding the life and death, and to Christians, the resurrection of Jesus. That part of the New Testament that is contained in the Gospels that tell of his life and his death and his resurrection, and of his teachings directly. Those who are Muslim, I think and hope will agree that much of the understanding of Islam, much of their faith in Islam, comes to them through the core story of the Prophet Muhammad. And if we go beyond those three great Western religions, I know I've left Judaism out for the moment. It's okay. I'll come back to it. Imagine what Buddhism would be like if we didn't know the life story of the Buddha. Confucianism without Confucius. And even those religions where it's not the core character whose story is so formative, many of them still have core stories through which their primary religious values are learned and taught. In Judaism, we have a core story. We call it Torah. The first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, the same collection of books, more or less, and we'll talk more about that at another time, that Christians call the Old Testament. The books of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Within Judaism, the Torah has another name, slightly misleading. We frequently call it the 5 books of Moses. In fact, Moses is the primary character in 4 of the 5 books. The leader of the people, starting in their servitude in Egypt, through liberation at the sea, to accepting the covenant with God at Mount Sinai, and through the 40 years of wandering. Each of those episodes significantly formative in the Jewish history and experience. But we also have the book of Genesis, in which Moses doesn't appear. He's only in 4 of the 5 books of Moses. And to fully understand the law and lore, the history of Jews and Judaism, you need more than just the core story of Moses and his life and his leadership. Because there's a significant preamble in the story of Abraham and of his descendants, without which Judaism is not fully understood, comprehended, and realized. So all of those figure into Judaism's story, as we'll see multiple times in multiple ways throughout this series. The second framework that I would suggest has value is the comparative framework. That's the one that I think most of us start from as a default. We compare the religion we're studying when it's different from our own to the one that we know better, hopefully, the one that we practice. We're constantly making comparisons between our life and our belief and the beliefs that we're being taught about and the lives that we're learning about. To give but one example of how this works, for Christians studying Jews and Judaism, there can be a comparative contrast between the relative importance placed upon action and deed by Jews and in Judaism to the significance in belief and word or creed to Christians in Christianity. To oversimplify it only slightly, for many Jews, the path to ultimate redemption is through our actions, particularly our actions towards each other. To equally oversimplify it slightly, to many Christians, to most Christians, the path to redemption is through the embrace of Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. Judaism puts the same emphasis on deed that Christianity puts on creed. And in understanding that contrast, that comparison, we not only get a better understanding as Jews about Christianity and as Christians about Judaism, but we get the beginning of a yardstick that may be valuable in assessing other religious ideologies as well. We framed a question: what is the path to redemption within that system? And we can now ask it of different systems to see what their similar and different answers are. There is one catch to the comparative method, however. There is an inherent trap and tendency to sometimes skew the way we see the religion that we're studying that is not our own by forcing it into comparison with our own. And instead of learning generalized truths, understanding that religion solely through the lens of our own belief and experience. I had that experience once years ago when my wife was working in children's publishing. A book on world religions was being written. They needed somebody to read the chapter on Judaism. And Lauren mentioned that at the time I was a rabbinical student. So I was given a copy and asked for my input. And it was clear the chapter was well written. It was clear it was well researched. And it was equally clear that it had been written by a Christian with very little experience or knowledge of Judaism or Jews before starting the project. Because several of the assertions made about what Jews believed were stated in Christian terms that we Jews use very differently. And I pointed all of this out. And the author and the editors were grateful. It also derailed the finished product for another year. But the finished product that emerged was far better, far cleaner, far more accurate. It's not an easy trap to avoid, but it's an incredibly useful tool when you can. The third framework is the conceptual framework. What are the concepts that define this particular religion, this group, this belief? I've listed a number of them here. What are the values that Judaism teaches and lives by? What is our history? What are our holidays? Our liturgy and our theology? Our language? Our culture? How do they define us as Jews and impact how we see the world and how we act in the world? And I would ask you to consider, are there other factors that you would add to this list that I might have missed? the conceptual framework, probably the cleanest and strongest of the three frameworks in understanding a religious system in its own merits. I mentioned that text that I was asked to edit a number of years ago. Far more recently, when my older daughter was in high school, she found herself in a class called AP Human Geography. Human geography was a phrase I had never heard before she took this class. I came to learn that it's the study of how the natural world affects human development and how human development affects the natural world. Not surprisingly, one of the chapters in their textbook, one of the subjects that were core to AP Human Geography, was a discussion of world religions. The teacher who was teaching this class had become a friend over the time that my daughter was in high school because of the respect that she had for him. Anybody who impressed her that much was somebody that I wanted to get to know and learn from too. And so when Mac got to chapter 6 with the class, knowing that Emily was in the class, knowing that I would be asked questions by her potentially, he took advantage and asked if I would come in and talk about Judaism to his class. And he asked if I could find representatives to bring in as well about Christianity and Islam. When I read the chapter in Emily's textbook, I understood why he wanted me to come in. Because this particular textbook, which was the textbook at the time, took all of the religious ideologies of the world and forced them into a binary. All the religions of the world were seen and defined as either being universalizing or tribal. And the book defined a universalizing religion as a religious ideology or group that is geographically widespread and has as a core tenet the desire to bring others under its wings. And the two leading examples of such religions that this book correctly gave, I believe, were Christianity and Islam. And if you weren't a universalizing religion, then according to this textbook, you were a tribal religion, a localized religious practice or ideology, more concerned with maintaining its unique characteristics than spreading out geographically or welcoming converts. And I knew immediately where the problem was and was going to be. And sure enough, to its credit, the book also acknowledged that there was one world religion that did not neatly fall into this binary. And that religion was Judaism. And so, at Mac's request, I came in to talk to his class, explain to them why I thought that even though the textbook tried to force Judaism more into the tribal category than the universalizing, that an equally solid case could be made to see Judaism as a universalizing religion than as a tribal religion. When I was done talking to the class, Mac explained to them the following. If there's a question about Judaism in the short answers, they're looking for the material that was taught to you in the textbook the way it was taught. But if you're asked to write an essay about universalizing and tribal religions, if you would like to claim that Judaism is a universalizing religion and you can make your case as well as the rabbi just did, don't worry about what the book told you. Back it up with your facts and your beliefs. I was gratified because I wasn't real thrilled with the binary, although I understood where they were trying to go with it. And I think in a lot of ways it was a helpful dichotomy to try and use to evaluate religions. But the reason Judaism doesn't fit is in large part because of our history. And we'll talk more about that as things go on. But again, if you're looking at generalized concepts, how you apply them to specific religions matters. I'm pretty sure that it was not a Jewish author or Jewish editor who came up with this binary of universalizing versus tribal, because a Jew would never have been able to see that as a binary. So Judaism, what is it and what isn't it? And we've already begun to talk about this a little bit. Judaism begins as a way of life, looking at that same Torah text that is the source of our core story. One of the critical moments in that story happens at Mount Sinai when Moses and the people are given the 10 Commandments by God directly. According to the story, spoken in a voice shrouded in the clouds at the top of Mount Sinai, accompanied by thunder and lightning, heard by everyone. The 10 Commandments, laws and values, to use that conceptual framework upon which Judaism is based. The Torah gives us a relatively full calendar of holidays and observances and a way of marking time. It gives us an internal tribal structure. It even provides us with texts that are taken into the liturgy, used by later generations. Familiar phrases like Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Hear, O Israel. Adonai is our God, Adonai is one, known as the watchword of the Jewish faith. To non-Jews, it's known as Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. History. We'll spend time looking at history at a later date. But if not proto-history or actual history, the Torah gives us the worldview and the philosophy by which Jews understand our history. And it certainly teaches us the idea that our God is a God who, at least in earlier days, was seen as an actor in history. And the Torah certainly gives us lore, hero-based sagas that teach valuable ethics, morals, values. To take one of the lesser emphasized ones within Judaism, but one that I think more people might be aware of because of its popular reenactment on Broadway. The story of Joseph. Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat was a musical play that was easy to write because the story was so clearly told in Genesis. All it took was setting it to music. That's the strength of the characters and the lore just from those first 5 books. All of these core elements of our Judaism as a way of life, not just as a religion. So, friends, Judaism moves in the modern times from being a way of life, just as our own lives become more compartmentalized, just as our society becomes more specialty driven. And in the modern world, Judaism, for some people, is a badge of peoplehood. I'm part of the Jewish people. My parents are Jewish. That makes me Jewish. For some, obviously, it is religion. defined by the synagogue we attend, where we worship, where we send our children and ourselves to learn, where we gather as community to celebrate together, to support each other, to do acts of social justice, to improve our world. For some, it's a matter of culture. We're rapidly reaching a time today where it's becoming hard to believe, but the bagel was once a uniquely Jewish food. Now it's been universalized. But there are elements of Jewish culture, the way we live our life outside of the sanctuary, outside of our religious ideology, that define who we are still. And for some people, that's enough. And that's the definition of their peoplehood. For some, it's even less than that. And yet all are Jews. And if we're not sure about that and we need a reminder, we're only 75 years removed from the end of the Holocaust, when an outsider placed a definition on who is a Jew and then acted with ruthless aggression against those so defined. One of the saddest questions I am ever called upon to answer is how many of the victims of the Holocaust were killed as Jews but never lived as Jews in their own minds. Because it didn't matter, because someone else had defined us by their terms. That's why this is important. That's why we've taken the time and are taking the time and the energy to do this Judaism Unplugged series. So that if others are going to define us, or if we're going to define others, we're at least going to put the responsibility on ourselves to do the best job we can, to do so accurately, to do so positively, to do so appropriately, to do so in ways that help and don't harm, to do so in ways that bring us together instead of driving us apart, even when we disagree, even when we differ in some of our core beliefs and core interpretations. As surely we do, and surely we will. This is where we start our discussions. This is where we start to evaluate the material that will follow in other videos as we work together to learn more about Jews and Judaism. Once again, I thank you for joining us for this video. I look forward, as I hope you do, to seeing what comes next. And as will become our sign-off, once again, having bid you shalom and welcome at the beginning of this video, now here at the end, I bid you shalom, farewell, and I wish for you shalom, peace in all of its forms, until we meet again. Take care. Thanks for joining us. Shalom.